The battle that should have been impossible. The Xantrax Dominion had conquered entire star systems. They were ruthless, efficient, and completely unstoppable. Their war doctrine was simple: overwhelming force. A fleet of hundreds of battleships, dreadnoughts, and carriers could reduce any planet to dust within hours. No civilization had ever resisted them. No species had survived an all-out assault. And now, they were coming for Earth. The Council's prediction. The Galactic Council gathered for an emergency session. The fate of humanity had already been decided. One of the council members scoffed. The humans won't last a day. Another nodded. Their fleets are too small. Their technology is primitive. The Xantrax will wipe them out. The council's conclusion was unanimous. Earth would fall. There was no doubt, no hesitation, no question. And then something happened that none of them expected. Earth's answer. The Xantrax had sent an armada of over 300 warships, battle-tested, armed with planetary siege weapons. A fleet designed to break civilizations. And in response, Earth sent one ship. Just one. Not a fleet. Not an armada. Just a single Terran warship. The Galactic Council was confused. The Xantrax Admiral was amused. He laughed. One ship? The humans are more foolish than I thought. He ordered his fleet to prepare for a swift victory. Destroy them in a single volley. The Xantrax fleet locked onto the Terran warship. Hundreds of targeting systems primed their weapons. It was over before it began. At least, that's what they thought. Then, everything changed. The warship that shouldn't exist. The USS Ragnarok was not like any ship the Xantrax had ever faced. It was small compared to their dreadnoughts. It wasn't built for brute force. It didn't need to be. It was something far more dangerous. It was fast. It was precise. It was deadly. The moment the battle began, it was clear. This was not a normal warship. It moved like no other vessel. It weaved through the void like a ghost, dodging incoming fire. The Xantrax targeting systems struggled to keep up. One of their commanders shouted, "It's moving too fast. We can't lock onto it." The Admiral's amusement faded. His instinct screamed that something was wrong. Then, the first shot was fired. And a war that should have been over in seconds became a nightmare the Xantrax would never forget. The Xantrax Empire prepares for war. The Xantrax Dominion had crushed dozens of species under their rule. Their fleet was a force of nature. They didn't just win wars, they erased civilizations. And now humanity was next. The invasion fleet hovered at the edge of the Sol system. Hundreds of colossal warships. Their plasma cannons could melt through moons. Their energy disruptors could collapse planetary shields in seconds. This wasn't a battle. It was an execution. Or at least, that's what the Xantrax thought. Admiral Xyrolus, a lifetime of victory. Admiral Xyrolus stood on the command deck of the Xantrax flagship, a veteran of countless conquests. He had seen entire worlds burn. He had watched empires fall, and he had never lost a battle. Now, he would add Earth to his list of victories. His officers stood at attention, awaiting orders. The battle would be quick. The humans had no fleets to match them, no allies to come to their aid. It was over before it started, or so he believed. The Galactic Council watches. The Galactic Council gathered, watching the events unfold. They had seen this before. A lesser species refusing to surrender. A Xantrax fleet arriving to exterminate them. It was the same pattern every time. A few resistance attempts. A few brave, foolish soldiers. Then, in a matter of hours, maybe days, another extinct species. The Council didn't even consider intervening. There was nothing to discuss. Humanity was doomed. The Terran warship appears. Then, the USS Ragnarok entered the system. Not a fleet. Not a dozen ships. Just one. The Galactic Council was confused. Admiral Xyrolus was amused. He turned to his crew, a smirk forming. One ship. He laughed. His officers chuckled. This was insulting. Had humanity truly lost its mind? He opened a transmission. Humans, this is Admiral Xyrolus of the Xantrax Dominion. You have one last chance to surrender. Spare yourselves. For a moment, there was silence. Then, a response. A calm, unwavering voice from the Terran warship. We suggest you surrender instead. The Xantrax command deck fell silent. Then laughter. Fire at will. Xyrolus ordered. And with that, the battle began. A battle that would change the course of history forever. The first volley. The Xantrax fleet opened fire. Hundreds of plasma lances, energy disruptors, missile barges. A storm of pure destruction. Enough firepower to wipe out a planet. And yet, the Ragnarok was gone. Not destroyed. Not crippled. It had vanished from their targeting systems. What? One of Xyrolus's officers shouted. The sensor scrambled. The scanners flickered. Then, the Ragnarok reappeared behind them, and it fired its first shot. The first kill. A single kinetic round left the Ragnarok's cannon. Not a missile. Not an energy weapon. A simple, hyper-accelerated slug of metal. It hit a Xantrax battleship dead center. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the entire ship exploded. Not just damaged. Not just crippled. Gone. A Xantrax battleship destroyed in a single shot. The command deck went silent. Admiral Xyrolus stared at the screen. Impossible. But it had happened. And it was only the beginning. Panic begins to spread. The Xantrax officers shouted in confusion. Sir, we've lost the Vorzan. They didn't use energy weapons. No plasma detected. It was just a projectile? But that's impossible. Xyrolus gritted his teeth. It doesn't matter. He pointed toward the Ragnarok. All ships, focus fire. Destroy it. Hundreds of warships turned their weapons on the lone Terran vessel. But as the next volley unleashed a storm of death, the Ragnarok moved again, and every shot missed. A nightmare unfolds. For the first time in his career, Admiral Xyrolus felt something he had never known before. Not confidence, not certainty, not control, fear. Because as he watched the USS Ragnarok dance between his fleet's attacks, as he saw another Xantrax battleship explode in a single shot, he realized the truth. This wasn't just a Terran warship. This was something else. Something designed to do one thing. Something unstoppable. And for the first time, Xyrolus whispered the words he never thought he would say. We are outmatched. The Terran warship arrives. The Xantrax Dominion had never lost a battle. Not once. They had conquered star systems, wiped out entire species, and shattered fleets. Their war doctrine was simple and effective. Overwhelm, annihilate, and move on. But now, for the first time in history, they hesitated. Because the USS Ragnarok had arrived. And the moment it entered the battlefield, everything changed. The ghost in the war zone. The Ragnarok didn't behave like a normal ship. It was small. It was fast. It was impossibly maneuverable. It didn't form battle lines. It didn't stand its ground. It moved like a predator. One moment it was there, the next it wasn't. Xantrax targeting systems couldn't keep up. Their warships fired blindly into the void. And every time they missed, the Ragnarok struck back. A new kind of war. The Xantrax battleships were built for brutality. Heavy shields, thick armor, massive firepower. But none of that mattered, because the Ragnarok never got hit. And its weapons were like nothing the Xantrax had ever faced. No plasma cannons, no energy disruptors, no missiles, just pure kinetic devastation. Hyper-accelerated mass drivers that turned warships into shrapnel with a single shot. One moment, a Xantrax dreadnought loomed over the battlefield. The next, it was gone. One shot, one kill, and it kept happening. The Admiral watches in horror. Admiral Xyrolus stood frozen on his command deck. His fleet was massive, hundreds of warships, and yet he was watching them die. One by one. His officers screamed reports. Sir, the Kazul is gone. We lost the Tyrannax-class battleship. Sensors can't track the Terran vessel. Xyrolus gritted his teeth. How is this happening? It's just one ship, the weapon that shouldn't exist. One of his science officers stammered. Sir, we analyzed the Ragnarok's weaponry. It's just metal. Xyrolus spun around. Metal? What do you mean? The officer looked pale. They aren't using energy weapons. They aren't using plasma. They're just firing metal slugs at us. That's impossible. The officer swallowed hard. Sir, one of those slugs is moving at nearly 30% the speed of light. Xyrolus froze, and for the first time he understood. They had assumed Terran technology was primitive. They were wrong. It wasn't primitive. It was efficient. Humanity had taken the laws of physics and turned them into a weapon. No energy shields could stop it. No armor could withstand it. It was raw, unstoppable force. And every single shot destroyed a warship. The fleet starts to crumble. Panic spread across the Xantrax fleet. They had never seen a battle like this. They weren't fighting a traditional war. They were being hunted. The Ragnarok weaved between their ranks. One shot, a battleship exploded. Another shot, a carrier split in two. Another, a dreadnought imploded from sheer impact force. The Xantrax fleet was shrinking. From 300 ships to 200 to 150 to 100. And still, the Ragnarok hadn't taken a single hit. Admiral Xyrolis faces the truth. Xyrolis' hand shook. His fleet was dying. The unstoppable Xantrax armada was being dismantled by one ship. One single ship. His officers looked at him, waiting for orders. "Sir, what do we do?" For the first time in his career, Admiral Xyrolis didn't have an answer. A message from the Terrans. And then, a transmission came through. A calm, unshaken voice. The Terran captain, Admiral Xyrolis, your fleet is defeated. Surrender now, and we will spare the survivors. Continue fighting, and we will erase you. Xyrolis stared at the screen. His pride screamed at him to fight. But logic told him this battle was already over. Because the humans hadn't just won. They had humiliated the entire Xantrax Dominion. And if one ship could do this, what if Earth had more? The impossible decision. His officers waited. His fleet burned. His enemies watched. And for the first time in Xantrax history, an admiral of the Dominion lowered his head and surrendered. The first strike, humanity's true power revealed. Admiral Xyrolis had never feared a battle. Not once. He had commanded fleets larger than entire planetary populations. He had seen species burn to extinction. He had crushed civilizations without mercy. But now, for the first time in his life, he was afraid. The USS Ragnarok moves first. The Xantrax fleet had fired first. Hundreds of plasma lances, disruptor beams, and missile barges streaked across space. A storm of pure destruction, enough to reduce a planet to dust. And yet, every single shot missed. The Ragnarok wasn't where they expected it to be. It had moved, faster than their sensors could track, faster than their computers could predict. 1 second, it was in front of them. The next, it was behind them. An unstoppable weapon. The Terran Warship fired back. Not with energy weapons, not with missiles, but with kinetic rounds. Pure hyper-accelerated metal slugs. Launched at nearly 1/3 the speed of light. The first shot hit a Xantrax battleship. It didn't damage it. It didn't cripple it. It erased it. 1 second, the ship existed. The next, it was gone. The impact force ripped through the vessel's reinforced armor like paper. A chain reaction tore through its reactor core. It vanished in a flash of white-hot fire. And the Ragnarok didn't stop. One shot, one kill. The next round slammed into a Xantrax dreadnought. A war machine the size of a small moon. The shot hit dead center. There was no explosion, no dramatic fireball. The kinetic round simply passed through the ship, like a needle through cloth. And then, half a second later, the dreadnought split in two. The front half kept moving forward. The back half stayed behind. And then, both halves detonated. Admiral Xyrolis watches in horror. The command deck of the Xantrax flagship was silent. Officers stared in disbelief. Another battleship exploded. Then another. Then another. "We can't hit them," one officer screamed. "They're moving too fast. We've lost 20 ships in under a minute." Xyrolis' hands clenched into fists. This isn't possible. But it was happening. His fleet was dying. Not slowly, not over hours or days, but instantly. The Ragnarok's tactical superiority. The Xantrax war doctrine was simple. Overwhelm the enemy with sheer numbers and firepower. They had never fought a ship like this before. A ship that didn't rely on brute force. A ship that relied on speed, precision, and intelligence. The Ragnarok moved like a fighter jet in deep space, weaving between capital ships, dodging barrage after barrage. And every time it fired, another Xantrax warship died. The Xantrax counterattack fails. Desperation spread through the fleet. The Xantrax changed tactics. They focused their firepower. Hundreds of ships targeted the Ragnarok at once. A coordinated assault. They wouldn't let it escape this time. Admiral Xyrolus snarled. We outnumber them 300 to 1. They can't dodge everything. The fleet fired in unison. The space around the Ragnarok erupted in energy. Plasma, missiles, disruptor beams. It was an inescapable wall of destruction. Except, the Ragnarok didn't try to escape. It simply disappeared. The impossible maneuver. 1 second, the Ragnarok was there. The next, it was on the other side of the battlefield. It had jumped, not through a warp gate, not through a standard FTL drive. It had moved through space in a way no one understood. One officer's voice shook. Sir, they're bending space-time itself. Admiral Xyrolus's blood ran cold. The Ragnarok fires its ultimate weapon. And then, the Terran warship prepared to end the battle. It stopped playing defense. It stopped dodging. It simply turned its cannons toward the Xantrax flagship, and it fired. Not a kinetic round, not a missile. Something else. Something far worse. The Singularity Lance. A weapon that ripped open space itself. A controlled micro-black hole, launched like a bullet. The Xantrax flagship's shields collapsed instantly. The hull buckled inward. Then it vanished, swallowed into nothingness. A ship the size of a city, erased in an instant. And then, as if the weapon had never existed, the rift sealed shut. The Xantrax flagship was gone. The battle was over. The Xantrax fleet was broken. Hundreds of warships gone. Their flagship annihilated. Their admiral silent. The remaining ships stopped firing, stopped fighting, stopped everything, because they knew they had lost. They had never stood a chance. And humanity had just changed the balance of power in the galaxy forever. The Xantrax panic, a desperate counterattack. The Xantrax fleet was in chaos. They had entered the battle with absolute confidence. Now, they were watching their armada fall apart. The Ragnarok moved faster than anything they had seen. Its weapons shattered their strongest ships. Their admiral was gone, and their flagship erased. For the first time in history, the Xantrax Dominion was losing, and they had no idea how to stop it. The chain of command fractures. With Admiral Xyrolus gone, command fell to his second-in-command, Commander Torvier. He was not ready. His hands shook as reports flooded in. We've lost another 20 ships. Our weapons are ineffective. Sir, what are your orders? Torvier's mind raced. The Ragnarok had destroyed over half the fleet in minutes. Their weapons couldn't touch it, and their shields were useless. But they still had one advantage: numbers. Torvier's voice hardened. Surround the Terran vessel. Cut off its escape. We will swarm them. The Xantrax fleet moved into position. The desperate plan. The Xantrax had always won with brute force. They had never needed strategy. Now they had no choice. Their remaining battleships, cruisers, and interceptors formed a sphere around the Ragnarok. Hundreds of warships, locking it in place. Torvier snarled. We'll drown them in fire. No ship can withstand this much firepower. No one escapes the Xantrax Dominion. The fleet fired at once. A storm of plasma, disruptor waves, and torpedoes converged on the Terran warship. The Ragnarok was trapped. The galaxy held its breath. And for a brief moment, the Xantrax believed they had won. Then, everything went wrong. The Ragnarok's counterattack. The Ragnarok didn't move. It didn't dodge. It simply activated something new. A pulse rippled from the ship's core. At first, it seemed like nothing happened. Then, the Xantrax ships stopped firing. Not by choice. Their weapons shut down. Their engines flickered. Their shields collapsed. Every single warship disabled. Commander Torvier's eyes widened. What is happening? The EMP wave of death. The Ragnarok had unleashed an EMP wave. Not a normal one. Not the kind that merely disrupts systems. This one rewrote enemy technology. The Xantrax fleet's own systems turned against them. Targeting computers went blind. Engines froze. Weapons refused to fire. And the Ragnarok was still untouched. The Xantrax fleet was helpless, sitting ducks, and the Ragnarok was not merciful. The massacre begins. The Ragnarok's weapons reactivated. Its kinetic railguns fired. One by one, Xantrax warships exploded. They couldn't dodge. They couldn't fight back. They were powerless. Torvier screamed orders. Get the systems back online. Now, his engineers worked frantically, but there was nothing they could do. The Ragnarok had taken complete control, and it was erasing them. A new kind of warfare. The Xantrax had always thought of humans as primitives, lesser beings. They had assumed war was about brute strength. They had been wrong. Humanity didn't fight fair. They didn't fight like the other species. They fought to win. And now, the Xantrax were learning that too late. Torvier faces the truth. His flagship burned. His fleet was crumbling. And then, the Ragnarok sent one final message. A simple transmission. 3 words. War is over. Torvier froze. He looked around. The Xantrax fleet destroyed. His command shattered. His empire defeated. He had one choice left, and he knew it. The order no Xantrax had ever given. He had spent his life believing the Xantrax were invincible, that his people were the strongest in the galaxy, that nothing could stand against them. Now, one ship had proved him wrong. Torvier's voice broke as he spoke the words that had never been spoken in Xantrax history. We surrender. The Galactic Council watched in shock. The mighty Xantrax Dominion brought to its knees. By one ship, one human warship, the battle was over. But the galaxy would never be the same again. The Admiral's last stand. For the first time in Xantrax history, a fleet had surrendered. For the first time, an Admiral had fallen in battle. But not all of them. Deep within the wreckage of the battlefield, a lone warship remained. A Xantrax command vessel. One that had not yet been destroyed. One that still had a single surviving leader. A defiant commander. Admiral Karnath Valzir had been watching. Watching as his mighty fleet burned. Watching as the legendary Xantrax Dominion collapsed in real time. And now, watching his second-in-command surrender. His sharp red eyes burned with rage. His claws dug into the metal armrests of his war throne. Cowards! Weaklings! Xantrax do not surrender. He opened a private channel to his remaining crew. His voice was calm but ice-cold. Every officer who has surrendered will be purged from our ranks. There will be no mercy. Then, his blood-stained fangs curled into a snarl. Activate the Doomsday Protocol. The Xantrax Doomsday Protocol. The Galactic Council feared the Xantrax for one reason. Not because of their ships, not because of their firepower, but because of their final weapon. A last resort. A doomsday option. If a Xantrax war fleet was ever in danger of total annihilation, they would not surrender. They would not retreat. They would detonate their entire fleet. A galactic-scale self-destruction, taking everything with them. Planets, moons, space stations, and most importantly, their enemies. Admiral Karnath had no intention of going down quietly. If the Xantrax Dominion could not have victory, then no one would. The Ragnarok's final challenge. Aboard the USS Ragnarok, sensors flashed red. Commander Huang's face went pale. Sir, we're detecting massive energy spikes. Dr. Voss's fingers flew over the console. Captain, the Xantrax fleet. She froze. Then, she whispered the words. They're self-destructing. Captain Mercer's blood ran cold. This wasn't a battle anymore. This was an extermination attempt. If the Xantrax fleet detonated at once, it would create an explosion so massive, the entire Sol system would be vaporized. Earth included. A race against time. The Ragnarok's AI flashed a warning. Estimated detonation, 90 seconds. Captain Mercer gritted his teeth. Options. Dr. Voss shook her head. We can't shoot them down fast enough. We can't disarm their cores remotely. If they go off, everything dies. Silence. Then, Mercer made his decision. We're stopping this. Now, the ultimate weapon. The Ragnarok had one final trick. A weapon so powerful it had never been used before. A weapon that could end the battle instantly. But at a cost. The quantum singularity drive. A modified black hole generator. Originally designed for experimental deep space travel. But now, it will be used as a weapon to consume the detonation before it could ignite. If it worked, the Xantrax self-destruction would be absorbed. If it failed, they would be the ones erased. The final order. Mercer took a deep breath. Then, he gave the order. Fire the singularity drive. The Ragnarok shuddered. Power levels redlined. And then, a black hole tore open in the middle of the battlefield. A spiraling vortex of gravity and raw energy. And everything changed. The end of the Xantrax fleet. The self-destruct activated. But instead of an explosion, the black hole expanded. It pulled the energy inward, swallowing the fire, swallowing the ships, swallowing Admiral Karnath's final revenge. The entire Xantrax fleet collapsed into nothingness. One by one, they vanished. No debris, no wreckage, no escape, just silence. And then, the black hole itself closed, as if it had never been there. The last Xantrax, Admiral, falls. A single escape pod floated in the void. Admiral Karnath was inside. He had failed. His empire was broken. His fleet was gone. And worst of all, he had surrendered, even if he never spoke the words. He snarled. He swore vengeance. But deep down, he knew the Xantrax Dominion was finished. Because humanity had won. The battle was over. For the first time in history, a single Terran warship had destroyed an entire fleet. And now, the Xantrax Dominion, the most feared empire in the galaxy, had fallen. The Galactic Council watched in stunned silence. They had never expected this. Humanity was no longer a minor species. They were no longer just another civilization. There was something else now. Something far more dangerous. A species that didn't just fight wars. They ended them. And now, the galaxy would never forget. The aftermath, humanity's message to the battle was over. The Xantrax fleet was gone. Not just defeated, not just crippled, erased. And now, for the first time in galactic history, the most feared empire in the universe had surrendered. Not to an armada, not to an alliance, but to one single Terran warship, the USS Ragnarok. The galaxy reacts. The Galactic Council had watched the entire battle unfold. Their screens had gone dark when the black hole consumed the Xantrax fleet. Now, as the sensors recalibrated, all that remained was silence. No wreckage, no survivors, nothing. It was as if the Xantrax Dominion had never existed. For a moment, there was no movement, no transmissions, no words. And then, across the universe, one terrifying thought spread. What have we just witnessed? The new galactic superpower. For centuries, the Xantrax Dominion had ruled through fear, conquering, enslaving, erasing species from existence. And now, they were the ones wiped out. By humans. A species that the Galactic Council had ignored for years. A species that had been seen as insignificant. But now, the entire galaxy understood the truth. Humanity wasn't weak. Humanity wasn't primitive. Humanity was a force unlike anything they had ever faced. A force that didn't start wars. But when challenged, they ended them. The Council's emergency meeting. The Galactic Council chambers were filled with panic. Ambassadors from dozens of species demanded answers. Some were shocked. Some were terrified. A few were even furious. We must act. We cannot allow humanity to go unchecked. They wiped out an entire fleet. With one ship, what if they turn on us next? But others, the smarter ones, remained silent. Because they knew the truth. The galaxy was no longer theirs to control. The age of the Galactic Council was over. A new power had risen. A power that had just announced itself to the universe. Humanity's message. As the galaxy descended into chaos, a single transmission was sent out. Not a threat, not a demand, just a statement. From the captain of the USS Ragnarok. His voice was calm, steady, and absolute. We are humanity. We do not seek war. But if war comes to us, we will finish it. And then, just as quickly as it had begun, the transmission ended. Nothing more needed to be said. The message was clear. Humanity had spoken, and the universe listened. The fate of the Xantrax. The Xantrax Dominion was broken. The survivors, leaderless, defeated, scattered. Once, They had been ruthless conquerors. Now they were refugees. And Admiral Carnith, the last surviving Xantrax warlord, he drifted alone in his damaged escape pod, the last remnant of an empire that no longer existed. For the first time in his life, he knew what it felt like to be powerless, to be the hunted. And as his ship floated toward the endless dark of space, he whispered his final words. Humans are the real monsters, the galaxy's new reality. Fear spread across the galactic empires. They had watched the Xantrax fall. Now they had to ask themselves, could we be next? One thing was certain. The universe had changed forever, and the next time war came, no one would underestimate humanity again. The legend of the Terran Warship, the USS Ragnarok, had disappeared. Not destroyed, not crippled, simply gone. The warship that annihilated an entire fleet, outmaneuvered an empire, and changed the course of history had left the battlefield, vanished into the darkness of space, leaving behind only a story that would become legend, a name spoken in fear. Across the galaxy, the name Ragnarok spread, whispered in the halls of the Galactic Council, feared in the war rooms of old empires, worshipped by rebels and outcasts seeking freedom. For some, the Ragnarok was a nightmare. For others, it was hope. But no one dared challenge humanity again. Not after what they had seen. Not after what had happened to the Xantrax. Because now, everyone knew the truth. The humans were watching. And if provoked, they would strike back. A war that never came. The Galactic Council assembled its fleets. They debated retaliation. They feared what had happened to the Xantrax. But they feared the Ragnarok even more. No one knew where it had gone. No one knew if Earth had built more. And so, no one dared attack. Because if a second war came, it wouldn't just be the Xantrax that disappeared. The last transmission. Years passed. The battle was written into history. And then, one day, a signal appeared. A simple transmission sent across the stars. No threats. No demands. Just 3 words. We are watching. No one knew where it came from. No one could trace it. But every empire in the galaxy received the message. And with it, a warning. The Ragnarok was still out there. Waiting. Watching. Ready to return if humanity was ever challenged again.